Okay, so we talked about pre-screening criteria to kind of get the application through, and you can see what those are. So basically, if it's sent in, that application, and these basic things are noted, then those get forwarded on. And again, I'm not going to belabor this because most of you all seem pretty waiver savvy and are well past this point. But I'll let you read over that and kind of look at that and give you a minute to take that in. Do we have any questions so far? Walt, did you have any?
We do not, other than the question Lauren asked.
Yeah.
Are there any plans to change the assessment process for children versus adults? And you said you would wait till
yes.
later. And then she said thank you.
You're welcome. Back in the back corner.
Would there be any situation where a person would have more than one waiver?
So the question in the back of the room was there a situation where somebody could have more than one waiver? And the federal government will not allow more than one waiver. So you can't have a waiver inside of a waiver, and you also can't be on more than one waiver. And so that's, for instance, that's why our 1915C folks are carved out of the 1115, because they can't be in two waivers, which works nicely for us. Because then they let us stay over in our corner of Medicaid and don't tinker with us as much. So the answer is no, you can't be in two waivers. You can only utilize one waiver at a time. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Earlier you mentioned about if we need help with the benefind,
mm-hmm.
and you said that ADRC.
Yes, an adult something resource center. It's your AAAs. They're housed inside your AAAs in your community. If you don't know what that is, afterwards I'll pull up online and look up what yours is in your county. And not AAA like the car insurance AAA. The Area Agency on Aging is what that stands for.
Is there information in here about appealing someone that was denied? I think that
no, the appeal rights, if you're denied a service, you get a letter that tells you specifically what those appeal rights are. And it's also laid out in regulation. But if you want specifics, you can see me after and I'll walk you through it. Any other questions? Okay, we'll move to a really fun topic, waiver wait list. As I said, and some of these are a little by about a month, because I developed this a while back before I sent it to Walt. But the gist of them is correct. ABI acute currently doesn't have a wait list. ABI long-term care has a wait list, and that is actually less. The 307 is less. HCB currently doesn't have a wait list, and we don't foresee one in the future. We've got quite a few slots. Michelle P., as you all know, has a wait list, has a long wait list. Model Waiver 2 does not have a wait list, and SCL has a wait list, and it is differentiated between emergent, urgent, and future planning. Emergent is they need services now. Urgent is that they'll need services within a year, and future planning is that they'll need services greater than a year. So let's talk about, I'm sure that the hot topic is the Michelle P. waiver wait list on this screen. The ABI long-term care wait list, some folks ask us, well, why can't you use the slots from the ABI acute to just funnel those over? When we write that waiver application, we designate and say, these number of slots are for this waiver specifically. It is funded by legislation specifically to that waiver. It is approved by CMS specifically to that waiver. So we can't move slots around. We can only utilize them for the specific waiver that they've been identified for. The Michelle P. waiver. That wait list came about, I think it was maybe even almost 3 years ago, when that became full. The wait list was, you sent in a form that said, I want to be on the wait list, here's my diagnosis, and everybody was put on that. We recognize that there are a lot of folks, I say a lot, but there are some folks on that wait list who are not really waiting because they'll never qualify because they don't meet those requirements, and never will because they don't have that that diagnosis. And so in that, we are looking at how we can a little more readily and quickly go through that wait list. We currently have about 200 to 250 slots. Yes, sir. We have a question.
Just a corollary on your wait list. There are also people that have just never applied because they saw the wait list is so blasted long.
Correct.
They said even if they were valid, that why even try doing it?
Right, and the comment in the room that was there are people who haven't even applied because they saw how long the wait list was and said, not even worth it because I'll never get a slot, was the comment by a gentleman here in the room. So what we are doing, even outside of waiver redesign, is looking at different ways that we can go through that wait list a little more quickly by looking at the folks that are on the list. Now, we currently have about between 200 and 250 slots that have been funded for a while that we try to go through. We've been trying to go through them for 2 years. But what happens is when we offer somebody a slot, that person then has that slot for a year. Once we give them, because we have to have what's called unduplicated slots. That's what CMS requires. That means if I give that slot to somebody and they utilize even 1 day of service, it is theirs for a year. They could move to Kalamazoo and still that we have to keep that slot theirs for a year. So if they access service for 1 day, then that slot's done. Also, we have to give them due diligence to utilize that slot. So we send out a letter saying your number's up, please let us know whether you want to utilize. Even if we set up the assessment, then once that assessment is completed, then we give them appeal rights if they're denied. That appeal process, and we have to hold on to that slot until all of their appeal is exhausted. So that slot then could be held up depending on if it's through the normal appeals process, it could be held up from 3 months to a year. If it goes even further than that, it can be held up for years, plural, based on civil court and things like that. So you understand a little bit why it's hard to get through those slots, because we have to give everybody that's on that due diligence. And so we're working with, I'll get you in just a second, we're working right now with the CMHCs who currently do these to see if there's a way that we can leverage their manpower to go out and do those assessments quicker so that we can get through that wait list. We have a question here in the room.
How is the number of slots for each category determined? Is there some kind of a statistical model based on the population or what?
So initially, when you first start a waiver, you ask for so many slots based on what, like for Michelle P., it was based on a lawsuit, and we said we have this many people on the wait list that we need to fill out. Let's add some to that. And then each year we request additional slots based on available funding. And so if we know that there's a windfall of so much, or it could be based on we see that this is not enough slots, let's ask for, 1 year we asked for 2,000, Michelle, and of course they laughed in our face and said not going to happen, but then it becomes a conversation of, well, this is how many slots we can fund. So we typically look at the wait, if there's a wait list, how many that are there, how many slots we currently have that we're trying to allocate, and in addition, kind of knowing what the windfall of the money situation is to decide how many to ask for.
Who approves the slots, federal and state?
Both. So the federal, we have to do that waiver application that I told you about, and if we add slots, we have to do an amendment to that and say we want 500 more slots. So then it goes to them and they say, yeah, that's fine. I don't know that the feds have ever told us, no, you can't have more slots. So it's really a formality, but it has to be on books. But then it goes to the legislators who say, okay, you have 500 slots, but we have no money to fund those. So even if we're awarded the slots on the federal level, the state also has to award money to fund those.
Is there a lobbying agency that's involved?
What?
A lobbying agency?
So the congressmen and those folks are, and I can't hire a lobbyist, but individuals can. So we have Walt has his hand, and then I'll come to you.
Well,
A participant asked if Pam could, or Pam's question could, they're having trouble.
She asked how the slots were approved, if they were approved both on the federal and state level. And then the answer was yes. The federal government has to say, yes, we'll allow you to utilize those slots. And then the state legislators have to fund them. She additionally then asked if there was a lobbyist for that. And I indicated that the government can't push for a lobbyist, but individuals or providers or whoever can. But I can't speak to that.
My very low functioning daughter has been on the SCL waiting list for about 12 years now. And I was at a seminar before where it was explained to me that when the vacancies come up for SCL, they're allotted to the different area development districts. And since we are in the bluegrass, which also has to deal with Oakwood, trying to put them into the community, that frankly, and I was even told this by a state representative, I would really be better served by trying to move to one of the smaller ads that didn't have so much competition for vacancies. Is that still the case?
Currently, no. That typically what we have, because there are so few slots that we can allocate, so every year the slots that are not used, those become available again, and those slots are typically for SEL, what we have to kind of give out, and typically we use those for the emergent and the urgent folks. So those are typically what those, now if we have, you know, a bunch, it may be looked at by population and things like that. But typically those are used on the folks that we have on the emergent and urgent wait list. And her question was, how are the slots in SCL allocated? She had heard that it was based on geographical location as opposed to the levels on the waiting list.
So just a curiosity question, you know, if all those were legitimate people awaiting service for the Michelle P., how long would it take to get those almost 6,000 people? So
the question was, if everyone on the Michelle P. wait list was appropriate, how long would it take to get through those 6,000? And the answer is I have no idea, because it would depend on the folks actually utilizing the services, whether they continue to utilize those services, and getting funding for additional slots. So it would be based on those things. So there's really no way to even guesstimate what that would be. And Walt had a question from online.
Yes. Are there counselors or agencies that assist individuals or families with the applications to help ensure that they're comprehensive, complete, and have a high probability of approval if all criteria are met?
And so to talk to high probability of approval, I can't talk to that because it is an independent entity looking at them. And we certainly wouldn't want applications written to skew that thought. But again, the ADRCs, which are housed inside the AAAs in your area, do have individuals that can assist families in that process.
You might want to say what AAA is, because it's not the auto.
Oh, yes, AAA is the area agencies on aging within your county.
A question from online. Once someone gets on a waiver, are they ever reassessed to see if they still need waiver services? Yes,
they're the question was, are folks on waivers reassessed to see if they still need it? And the answer is yes. There's a federal mandate that requires that anyone receiving waiver services be reassessed every year, both by a functional assessment and also through the person-centered planning process. So they not only look at the person themselves and, for instance, SCL, that diagnosis doesn't go away. That's a lifetime, but you can change your functionality. And so looking at that to determine then what services best support that person, and then through the person-centered planning process, look at what services are needed and wanted for that person. So the answer is yes.
A question from Shauna online. How many allocations have there been this year for the Michelle P. and the SCL?
I don't know right off the top of my head, and I don't want to try and ballpark an answer. Again, we have been trying to go through about 200 slots on Michelle P. And SCL, I know there was at least 100 at the beginning, or at some point in this year, that were allocated, but I don't know exact numbers and don't want to give you incorrect information.
Who determines if you're on the emergent or urgent list?
So you send in documentation to show, and it's sent into the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disabilities, DBHDID, to justify that. So for like in
Case manager would do that?
Yes, your case manager would send that in. So for instance, or the individual can send it in. So for instance, one of the things that meets criteria is a loss of caregiver within the home that leaves you without a caregiver. So that would obviously be something that would be emergent. Urgent is, for instance, an individual is aging out of school and has no help. They're aging out in a year. So then they would say, oh, in a year we're going to have nobody for this. Aging out of foster care, those kind of things would then qualify for urgent. And then, of course, future planning is we know somewhere down the road this individual will need it. And you can move through those categories as you see need progressing.
A question from online. Once on the waiting list for the Michelle P., when a slot does open, does it go in the order that you're placed on the list, or how is the decision made?
Yes. So
when a slot opens?
for the question is, how are slots given out for Michelle P? Is it based on when you get on the wait list, or is it similar to SEL? Currently, there is no level with Michelle P, and it is solely by when you get on the list. We have a very detailed chronological order, even down to the second of when you are put on the wait list. And so that's when the wait list was enacted in regulation. That's how the powers that be at the time set up that wait list, was to do it chronologically.
And SCL used to be like that.
Yeah, SEL used to.
It was like that, you know.
And there are good points to that and bad points to that in both ways. Any other questions on wait list? Nope. Okay, we'll go on to,
We have one more question from Kimberly online. If someone is on the Michelle P. waiting list, is the list based on first come, first serve, or when they sign up on the waiting list, or is it based on age?
it is based on when they signed up for the wait list. So the day we received their completed request to be on the wait list, again, to the second, that's how it's divvied out. So the fun hot topic right now, waiver redesign. To kind of catch you up to where we've been, back in April of this year, the Department of Medicaid Services said our waivers are not running, we assume our waivers are not running as best as they can. And we want to take a look at that. As you know, they're doing 1115 on the other side of Medicaid, and I guess we thought, hey, we want to join in on the fun of doing everything, and so we jumped in with both feet. We did procure a contract through all the procurement laws, which are headache, mind-numbingly redundant, but through RFP process, we procured a contract with a consulting firm called Navigant. Navigant has been all over they've actually served in 49 states, touching some sort of Medicaid redesign, many of those looking at their long-term care supports. In that they have folks that were, it ranges from folks who were case managers, actually doing case management, service providers. There's a nurse who was the director of IDD services in Pennsylvania and redid their waiver, their 1915C waivers. There is an aging director from Georgia, from Louisiana. There are folks who have worked at CMS. They have just a lot of knowledge. They have current contacts with CMS, and so a lot of times I'll call up one of the folks and say, hey, can you tell me what the current feel in Washington is about, I asked them about block grants not too long ago, and they're like, currently, the president is the only one who is pushing for them. Everybody else is saying bad idea, and so kind of those things to have the ears to the ground. But they are, I must say, they have been really phenomenal in with even in our cabinet, looking at things and not just taking what Lori says, but really looking at what everybody says. So there's a two-pronged process to what we're doing. The first is our operational and organizational structure within Medicaid, Department of Behavioral Health, and DAIL. Those are the three entities that actually provide the waiver services out throughout the state, and not provider-based, but the governing entities. So we first charged Navigant with looking at our house and saying, okay, what are we doing in-house that is taking too long, that is arbitrary, that is kind of, it is not helping the flow, because people would call one entity and get one answer, and then they'd call another entity and get another answer. So how do we do that better? It was really important to us that we take a look at our house. One of my reasons was I wanted to make sure that they weren't just going to take what I said and just roll with that. I was really excited when they started talking to us. They went and talked to 30 to 40 of the individuals doing the work every day. They didn't just go talk to the Commissioner of Medicaid and say, what do you want, sir? They went and talked to the individuals doing the work and saying, when you take a phone call, what do you hear? What are the complaints you get? What are the things that work well and are working through ours? The reason we started there is because we have to make sure that Medicaid and our sister agencies are in a place that no matter what change happens, that we can sustain that. If you've ever tried to call up at my office in the Department of Medicaid, chances are you're not going to get a person because we're doing 52 things at once. And a lot of times we're spinning our own wheels because we're trying to do something somebody else has already done. And we just didn't know it. So looking across all of the agencies to make sure that we were optimizing our house so that if there was a change, that it could be sustained and done well. So looking at that, while they were doing that, they were looking at other states and what their 1915 Cs did, looking at best practices across the nation, talking with CMS about what's the climate, what's the current. In addition, DMS said, you know, before when we did public comment, it was this 30-day thing that we put out in the paper and said, or on our website and sent out to our advocacy groups and said, make public comment. We didn't want to do it that way. That wasn't enough for us. When Jill Hunters, who is our deputy commissioner, she asked me, will you please be the project manager of this? And I said, I have one request. And she said, okay, what's that? And I said, we focus on quality of service and talk to the people who are doing these services or receiving these services. And she said, well, we do that. And I said, we don't do it well. And she said, okay. So we have a mailbox set up, and I have cards up here, and it's in the back of your slide that give you that so you can stick it in your purse when you're at home and send those. We have a mailbox that's solely dedicated to public comment. I personally read every single email that comes in that. We've had about 80-some that have come through that mailbox, and there's some really insightful suggestions and things that come into there. In addition, typically, as I said, our public comment was, you send us your public comment. I said, let's go out. Let's go to where people are. So we set up 10 locations across the state. You can see where those were. And within that, we had 4 groups at each of these. At each of these, we talked to individuals who were receiving services, caregivers of individuals who were receiving or waiting to receive services, direct service providers, so the folks that are hands-on, and then also executive level, because all 4 of those folks have very different thoughts about waivers, and we saw all kinds of things there. And the next step from those is that Navigant will kind of pull all of that public comment. So if you send in a letter to the public mailbox, that went to the same place that the comments out in the field went to them. Those went out, and then Navigant's going to pull us a report together that says, here's what we heard. Here's what every stakeholder said. Now, it's not going to have names because we don't need the names of who said it. If somebody said Lori Gresham is horrible and I can never get her to return my call, I don't want to know who said that because I don't want to have that bias against them. And if that's the truth, then it needs to be heard. And so they're going to make us a report, and that report we will even send out at the focus groups and through the public comment box. Everybody that was there gave us an email address. I have a giant list of folks that either emailed or have contacted me to say put me on your list or attended a focus group. That when those reports go out, I'll send them to all of them. They'll still go through all the advocacy groups and all the normal ways, but this is a whole other way.
Is there a deadline on this public?
When we're finished, because we're going to take public comment until we finish submitting, because we'll consider it up until the day we send it to CMS. So that mailbox is still up and going. I checked some this morning. So we had about 488 individuals. And those comments, as I said before, I wanted to make sure Navigant just didn't take what I said. They take those comments, whether it be from you or the governor. They kind of all go into one pot, and it drives the selections that they make. They have a it's called a Kettner-Trigo model. If you want to research it, it's a long-standing way to form choices. And so it takes all that and quantifies it into a number that says, based on comments, whether it be my comment or your comment, and related to goals that, I said first goal, quality of services, that's one goal. To take those and weigh those against the different models. I think initially, before we even talked, they wanted us to know what options are out there. They gave us like 20 some options. I was like, you want me to think about what? And the options that they range from do absolutely nothing, which obviously is not what we want to do, or I wouldn't have procured a contract to look at it. You all, I'm sure, have heard about super waiver, to look at that, to look at, they've even gone as far as looking at a model where it melds Medicare and Medicaid that CMS isn't even approving right now, but they wanted us to have all the options. And then they'll weigh all of the comments based on that to see what comes out as the best option. Thank you. I am roasting. And so that's the next step is in this process is to get the initial report that says this is what we heard across the state. And in general, I wasn't in all the groups. I was in some of them, and I was out in the front inputting the email addresses, so I was always late to every group that I was in. But a lot of the things that we heard about PDS, and as I was telling them earlier, we heard both sides of PDS. Nobody should ever get paid for PDS. Everybody should get paid for PDS, and you should give them as much money as they want. So there were, and everywhere in between. We heard a lot about eligibility for Medicaid, not waivers. The DCBS piece where you have to go and sit in the DCBS office for hours and hours and hours and call 52 people and send in 900 sheets of paper. And then that's not enough, and they ask you for 3 more that draw a picture of a puppy and send it in. I don't know. And so we heard that a lot. We heard a lot about that. We heard about MWMA from the providers. We heard about fear that we're going to take away waivers. Heard fear that we're going to reduce the money. Not once has our requirement been reduce the spending. Not once. Nobody has told us we are taking away not a penny from these waivers. Nobody said that. I can't say what Donald Trump will do in 2 years because I'm not sitting in his pocket, but from our perspective, the pie, the whole of the pie doesn't change. Now, what we will look at is, are we spending those dollars appropriately? So are we giving the right people the right services? Are we giving somebody a budget of $20,000 that needs a budget of $40,000, and somebody who needs a budget of $20,000, are we giving them a budget of $40,000? So kind of looking at how we're divvying up that pie. Looking at, are we serving all the right people? So looking at one of the options was expanding waivers and adding more waivers, keeping in mind that while they've not said they're taking any money, they're surely not giving us any more. If anybody finds a pot of gold somewhere, we'll be happy to take that money, but nobody said that they're doing that. So looking at that pie and saying, are we meeting the most appropriate needs? The Deputy Commissioner Jill Hunter, who is one of the folks who is helping drive this bus, one of the things that she is really passionate about is that we're serving the folks that Medicaid was, I talked back in 1965 when Medicaid was incepted. Medicaid was supposed to be for those who are especially circumstanced, aged, blind, disabled, and children. That was kind of the groups that was served. And as we all know, that has grown and expanded. And looking at the folks we serve are those folks that they're talking about there. So are we serving the right folks with the right services and doing it efficiently? So looking at those things and guiding the choices based on what we heard out in the field. So that's our next step.